Because I've had to ask the question since 2010, was what was their basis for thinking it was any state of concern or interest for the nosier ones known to me throughout Capital Chemist who have taken a particular interest in surveillance, increased surveillance moments when I'm living alone at Downer. And I was enjoying the space. Well, yeah, in that it was a new experience for me. Been able to sing, practicing singing, hanging with my cat, singing to my cat. Yeah, I know they were previously, it was this newspaper article. It explains a lot now looking back, a lot of, so when they were standing over me saying, violence, it's caused by genes, it's genes, it's genes, it's genes, they weren't letting me express either a further querying perspective or enter into a verbal debate. But then it turned out that they were wrong, and I was unaware of the error they had made, because what they were hiding from me is that they're researchers whose ethics are very much under dispute, but whose research efforts won't work if you were to know who and what they really are. Because ask yourself, just imagine the role of the human social science researcher. What does he do? He's got access to sound or voice changing software, so he can sound like a bunch of policemen interrogating you. He or she could sound like Julia Gillard personally addressing you, or the Queen, and they can run a bunch of tests impersonating the sounds of a bunch of other people's voices. But the Constitution says that if you're involved in any sort of scientific experimentation or treatment against your consent, then the Constitution of your country has been violated. So you have to be told what their test situation is, that you're in a test situation, and be asked if you give your free consent and agree to participate in one. If you don't, then and the business proceeds to initiate one anyway, they've essentially had you kidnapped, or if they haven't even terminated your bloody role, a formal role as an employee, which by then, yeah, find it convenient. Let's get in there right at the end and throw in that documentation after all to get him to sign it and say, yeah, see, it took him 9 years to get there, but we finally gave him legible, readable workers' rights. No, it made all the difference that they did not sit down and ask me specific questions. See, I know that's all that faith is. It's assumption. It's assumption and trust in that assumption. So you will become passionate about the trust. You'll become passionate and emotional because you're trusting in an assumption. But just as the placebo effect, like science, what science calls the placebo effect, is such an effect where I could take the leaves out of a tea bag, wrap it up in some Glad wrap, and tell you it's a new strand of marijuana, treated marijuana, hydro grown. Smoke it, you'll get stoned off your tits. You will be so fucking stoned. And then I sell it to you for $25, and you call me the next day and go, "Well, thanks, man. I got stoned off my tits." And this gets discovered in pharmaceutical experimentation too. The success rate was 70% and 30% in the placebo, they'll say in findings. So when you read of quotes that say things like "all knowledge lives through imagination," this is sort of why it's important that we think that the imagination is respected. If we're not able to understand it now, it's not to be deemed a bunch of conflicts. The conflict is in the science, it's the scientists and the current state of their tech and their analytical tools, which just means suspend judgment. Like, that's what the Age of Enlightenment taught us. We don't need to say what caused the universe. Instead, in order to justify unbelief, all we need to do is offer at least one reason why your God is not a good enough explanation. And often the infinite regress chain that begins with the follow-up question, who or what created God? God doesn't need to have been created. Well, perhaps then maybe it was the universe that didn't need to be created after all. Perhaps, just perhaps, huh? I mean, it doesn't. But even if you didn't have that response, all you need to do, you do have the option of saying, the suggestion of this explanation is so incoherent. It's like telling a pebble on the ground that it's got. You're looking forward to the release of its autobiography next July. So we know the placebo effect is a real thing. We know it's something. We know it's something sufficient to the extent that school kids can be left thinking. And that's the thing. Who's measuring the people and the way that the people talk to and approach the people, that they give the tea leaves to the school kid to in high school, or the pharmaceutical company doing this product study does? Who's studying the disposition in the way that those offering the real tablet or the placebo tablet offer it, and their tone of voice and their disposition and their politeness and their sincerity or their detachment and tone of voice that is indicative of a snide, smug superiority. You're beneath me, patient. Fuck you, sick fucking motherfucker. Get out of my face. Take your pill and get out of my face. We're trying to gather data. And yeah. Yeah, no, I think so. I think enough has been said there, but saying, well, if you imagine a mind being studied and they're not finding the proof that they I guess, feel they want. At what time, when do they terminate the process and admit error and fault? It's only in faith that when they're right by accident, and it's only in faith that nothing can ever be considered the proof of something, because when they start out with assumptions and heartfelt.
Start over again. Good morning. You were on the trading post.
Your responsibility comes from the rebellion against your own sexuality. So you talked Ben Gilbert out of being an architect and got him to, get the opportunity to get his own store as a pharmacist for you two. I don't understand what utilitarian function this conceptual architect plays in the role of your theology, but I do know that you think you can violate the privacy of anyone's domicile and home residence. And yeah. So what I put to you is that you falsely, what you should do if you are of good manners, and I don't think you know what statements like "be true to yourself" mean, because the truth are the true or actual facts of a case. Could we have had existentialists ask challenging questions like, can we ever know truth? What if there are no facts but merely interpretations and things of this kind? But the polite thing is to ask. See, all I would do was go quiet, but what it meant I needed as a result of my working for your company. Now being on meds, I hate the feeling of going to shop at a capital chemist shop. I can't stand it. So your competitors seem that their places smells like a daisy. Don't be ambiguous and fail to define what co-owning a private sector business means to you, while proving to me that you don't respect my privacy outside of work hours when at home. Continue to prove that to me, and it's pretty much a hostile. You've communicated and conveyed a hostility, and managing pharmacists more than twice my age is saying the same thing to me. So it's not like that's some nervous, genetic trigger from my past. Understand your religion has the all-seeing eye, and it has something called the architect, and so you can call this talk of mine rude and disrespectful to your religion, but if you're violating the Sex Discrimination Act by accosting employees, how many times in a near decade of working for you and Roger did I come up to you and Roger and say, I think you two are disgraceful. I have hated working for you as people. If Roger, in your case, if you choose not to have a family or adopt, stay away from. limit what you say to the scope of professionalism, please. And Gary, you know, if your Freemason Lucifer was willing and ready to give a Boston and Cleveland steamer to God, which is where, in accordance with God's preference, whether he lies down on the floor on his back, and a transparent glass table is either placed above God's chest, while Lucifer drops his trousers and then takes a shit. So God experiences the view of the shit falling onto the glass table, but it either stops and mushes onto the transparent glass surface of the table, or it just goes directly on his chest, whether he wants the Cleveland or the Boston steamer. A Blumpkin is to give oral sex while the recipient is taking a number 2 on. Yeah, and not give rather than that these two gods are in every Freemason's, in the Freemasons' minds. So long as they think that they've got the right to define homosexuality this way, it'd be a good experiment, so they can rule out and make sure that religious discrimination isn't inspiring sex discrimination too. So I'd ask Roger and Gary questions like, you know, if the two Freemason deities approached you and said, you are our believer and we are your two gods, will you watch us? 69, will you pledge yourselves to watching us? Defining, he'll see the particular human, and it'll generally be the males. I'd wonder how many women has he truly accosted, taken aside and said, all right, that's it, I'm commanding you, come out and be a lesbian. How many women has he said that to? He's got it. He's got it in for boys, Roger. Telling boys to come forth and become homosexuals and come out. So yeah, working from a premise. So I find and have recommended Bowie's. It was, to my understanding, his final recorded film clip, and you know, you see. So I mean, for instance, why does it not occur to you as managers and so-called professionals not to think, in the event that I want to talk along the lines of a person's sexuality in my employment, should I not first introduce them to the question of this prospect and ascertain if they consider such conversations to be appropriate, appropriate, B, would they, you know, take offense, to not only not do that, but, you know, show off your chest thumping and how Peter Holder was your bitch, because he wouldn't dare he wouldn't dare contest you when you stand and tell, you know, when you stand over and say in front of Pete, oh, be a good poof. Yeah, and make a consideration like that my problem to think about when, you know, I don't know if in a way I should thank you, because but the facts are you've done nothing. What you've gone and proceeded to do, and with your stupid reporting, is it's nothing new. As as concepts get taken. Oh yeah, but so your two gods, did you measure them to exist in a lab, or did you preclude or assume that they exist? Your responsibility comes from the rebellion against your own sexuality.
Down for him now. All right. Yeah. Well, he thought he had read it off on the radio. Yeah, well, you just call him and ask him yourself. Oh, I didn't know I was on the radio now. You certainly are, yeah.
And so yeah, they can be that vague and only partially talk to you and it's almost deliberate. Like you wonder whether what they've said is a summary of, or an attempt at a summary of your position, a question being asked you, or a representation depicting their stance. But they'll often throw the words, confidential information around in such in such a fashion. Now, so we can say it's quite fair to say that Sex Discrimination Act's been violated by their Religious Discrimination Act, and their religion obviously. If it's a pyramid scheme where you enter at the start by proving that your whole heart is in it, without knowing what it is, then as you move up, it's got to involve some element of looking down, so that they say as you move up to higher echelons, you were once one of these level entry commoners. Geez, don't they have a long way to go? Look how far you've come, by the way. Your heart's still in it, and blah blah blah. That's how pyramid schemes work. So this representation I've represented is incoherent. That they can say they're cherry picking ideas from. I mean, there was an episode like this on Star Trek, where during World War III, the time of World War III, a bunch of humans had gotten on a shuttle and flown to settle and make a new Earth, a planet. They found a planet called New Earth, and they had one religion that was an amalgamation of like Wiccan, Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism, all these religions rolled into one. And but the truth is that if you were to sit down with a council and debate the question, how do we know the true Christian? How do we prove the quintessential true Freemason? That debate would end with with divisive fire-offs at one another, and you would have two new denominations of Christianity and two new denominations of Freemasonry. You would not have this unity that they claim their religion is comprised of. So that's a front, but it's a front for what? So you can take as an Exhibit A proof that claim about their church, this pseudo-universalism. You can take, secondly, the pyramid scheme entry-level requirement entailing that you invest your entire heart into the Freemason Church before you get your first Sunday school lesson about the Freemason Church. Yeah. Which I'm sure are vital, life-saving lessons. They need to separate the fakes from the you know, and this is the opposite of a scientific presentation, where the onus is on you. It's your scientific discovery. Well, then you have to present your evidence to everybody else. You have to argue and represent your case to everybody else. You have to invite criticism. You have to endure peer review. You have to be willing to be falsified by another person who could know better. You know, there's so much more. So what I see them doing is accelerating the odds, because a person is going to be more comfortable emotionally if they see. Even that cult programmer Ted Patrick would write in his diary about how difficult it got on certain nights at this camp when kids' parents had college kids' parents had paid him to help get their son away from a cult. And Ted Patrick said after about day 2 or 3, he started to notice the beginnings of a feeling of some sort of lure from the music, by where he began to feel. Now this sensation is almost credited everywhere to be evidentiary of the truth of the claims made by that church. But why? And this is the subject I'm delving in on my book very quickly on, what I'm going to argue that dictionary definitions change, and theism is defined as the belief in the supernatural God or gods, whereas I'm going to argue it should be God or gods or supernatural dimension, because that would be where I would, as much as I love the guy, he's my favorite person to call himself a Christian in terms of thinking, but he calls himself a non-theist Christian. So, and he's very aware of the history and social politics of the time too. Yeah. So, and another proof that we have for this ghastly conclusion is that, the LGBT community is talked about like it's a community outside of not only the hetero community, not only the gay, lesbian, and transgender communities, but even there it can be said, well, the bisexual is in between realizing who or what they are then. So that instantly means that any following conversations, you'd be quite within your rights to compel hiding the mention of it, as long as it's definitionally tantamount to you're both, and therefore have a dual personality. So what were you up to today that the other you doesn't yet know about, and you're defined as a psycho fuck into existence? And this idea that a bisexual is both is incoherent, connotative to the legal definition of a person. And so what's it inspired by? The incoherency of Christ's murder, followed by the bodily resurrection in a resuscitated corpse, perhaps. There's one suggestion. It parallels that. Just as these Freemasonries. So what I was saying, you if you study the Bowie clip Lazarus, what you see him doing, it read in the notes after he died. He'd left his earnings to his beautiful wife, Iman. Tremendous model. But I could just see Roger and Gary watching that clip going, see, we were always right to call him a poof. Now he's bloody come. Yeah, so you've got to ask yourself, what I'd like to draw our attention to here in this 10 minutes is this absurdity of, Bertrand Russell pointed out years ago that all the religions, they can't all be true. And even if we were just limited to three, the three in the Abrahamics, is it Judaism, is it Christianity, or is it Islam? And they each are offshoots from that story of Abraham and God testing him to see if he'd kill his own son Isaac, just to prove his love of God. And Isaac's bursting in tears, and God puts a stop to it at the end and saves the day. That's perhaps a teary, some presumptuous component about. So anyway, yeah, we've established that Freemasonry is how he's making, is why he's choosing not to ask questions on the topic of identity, themes of identity, and then to give you the chance to answer them. So does that mean, conversely, he's answering to, in his mind, his service to a Freemason grandstand, one true God, super deity, But yeah, that definition, your responsibility comes from the rebellion against your own sexuality, sounds to me a lot more like Freemasonry than it does homosexuality. And what I would have liked, and in making it clear that I was non-theistic and an atheist, I only made sure they were aware of that after I'd been approached with Gary saying I'm a Freemason, and it not taking long before you understand that Roger is too. So that they've got a loathing for Christians and Christianity on their mind, but I sort of shuffle from wanting to laugh at it to being a bit concerned by it, because when I enter into debates with Christians and contesting them, I made it a personal ethic to address every point that they make, and answer every question that they've asked, and then note and keep track of what statement, you know, what questions have I asked that they've not answered, and what have they dodged that, or potentially avoided, that was significant. And through analyses like that, you can get a sense of how true to themselves are they being about this, or is it about that belonging to a cause? Because what you would often hear about Gary and Roger speaking about those whose path they prepared towards us to the psych ward is it's often talk like they were a hero, thinking they were on some stupid fucking religious crusade. But ironically, and that was what had led me to think, and then other pharmacists telling me that Roger does conflict work with various police. It was throughout the time of my employment that I was made to think these feedback post accessed outside of work remarks were part of how Roger would speak to anyone and everyone. Not that I would realize that I was the only one to be a full-timer, and not have had a chance to review my own me photocopy it for me. I'll take it in the book. So I can't have that. No. I don't want. Yeah. So, I would argue there's no point in. I've challenged that the best summary of the impact of Christianity on the modern world today, exempting from the obvious, it's up there with with Judaism and Islam. It's in that triptych. Excuse me. Yeah. Now, because I was convinced of ideals like if we fairly stuck to the affirmation of basic rights, and I think bisexual rights for bisexuals could be better described, and the definition of a bisexual could be better described. That might play a part on why this statistical occurring and reoccurring status of well-being is not being viewed with much of a need for prioritizing by healthcare journalists now. What got them into, how it wasn't how inspired they were by the thought of being able to kneel at Jesus' crucified feet and write about his health status through to his dying moments, as you tweak a cheek. The drive. So it creates. On certain points, it doesn't create frustration, though it shows that when an idea comes out as usurped, religious people take it very personally, as if their God is being contested. The belief in their God is going to be the next thing called ridiculous. I'm saying let them all have their right to it, just don't let them, unless they're paying you to be, unless they say to you, can we take you for half of your work shift today to the Freemason Church? Here's the bonus amount of money that we'd pay you for your work if you do half your shift today at the Freemason Church. Would you agree to this shift at the Freemason Church? And then we'll drop. But no, I certainly would not agree with Freemasonry deity archetypes being used for defining homosexuals. And then re-invoked later, rather aggressively, telling, commanding the... Yes, the Bose Lazarus is about, from these, I think it's giving a middle finger to religious authorities' compulsion or interest in targeting male members of the bisexual community and telling them that they have to come out of the closet and admit themselves to be gay men, or that they're gay men in disguise, which is, yeah, the I suppose the entertaining the claim that Bowie's work wasn't legitimate or more intelligently backed, churning out over 30 albums, and that he wasn't a brilliant and beautiful mind. So I see Lazarus, if you're a male in the bisexual community, and religious judges are saying, accept who you really are, you're really gay, come out of the closet as a gay man, then it's as if they would they're viewing you and judging your sexuality to be dead. So the Lazarus story is probably the source for why they're making that misjudgment now. What else could it be? Anyway, yeah, so and I'm also able to relate, even though I don't believe in. So there's two, as I decided to devote a bit of time to talk to this dual usage of believe in, and in philosophy, and particularly, yeah, when exploring questions like the God question and the truth value of axiomatic core values of varying, differing religions and churches. Extraordinary claims, Carl Sagan said, require extraordinary evidence. And so, you shouldn't expect anyone to take it seriously to if you ask, can you prove that your God exists? So it's a profound claim that they've made. If they're right, that's huge. So to ask for evidence is not just not wrong, wrong of you. It's and the onus is on them for if as soon as they come up to you saying, "Can I share my faith with you? I'd like to make you believe in God." The atheist doesn't have to get up each morning and characterize themselves by celebrating all the things they're not. Like, I'm not a member of the local sporting team. Yay! That's amazing. That's so amazing. I'm not an astrologer. Don't you substantially think about what it's like to we non-astrologers? So yeah, nor do we wake up thinking about how good, though it can occur within the short term after leaving a church, but that's just as you wash it out of your system. Then you are an atheist. Now, yeah, Marilyn Manson has not called himself an atheist, and I can appreciate why, but he's talked about Antichrist meaning to him the collective disbelief in God. But atheism has in the past, I think, been to what's the right word? Akin with nihilism and akin with the rejection of morals. Etymologically, it did have those overtones immediately associated with the word. If someone was misbehaved, you could call them a godless son of a bitch. You have no morals. But then when you find that only hinges on their hope that God exists and dictated the Ten Commandments correctly to Moses, then they seem to be the ones playing, gambling other people's lives. But yeah, simple question. If morals are coming from God, then with which moral comprehension could you ever tell an evil God from a good God? So yeah, so picture it, if you will, this adversarial contest of Freemasonry against Christianity, and they're going by the same prime for canonical texts. um, the same four Gospels. So the same conclusions that have been worked out and retested and confirmed for 200 years now about the veracity of the New Testament, explains with some very simple principles. No scribe could write anything of direct insult to the Queen, or yeah. To what greater source of truth can we turn than to the imperishable truths found in that treasure house, the Holy Bible? And I'd recommend for book one, shit. Yeah, they start out with heartfelt love for assumption. Then where do they end up? They end up loving the smell of their own farts. They end up thinking that nothing is something. They end up, yeah. I think really, really arrogant. Depending on, and that's the thing, the compatibility of their profession to their to their values. Minimalism, I think, is the best philosophy if you were to be moving between a variety of different jobs. What I'm saying, I believe, should be a federal government. It's a backward step that they've done things in Sydney, like have apartment complex building standard inspectors be privately sourced. They should be federal government organizations, and there should be more. It'll create more jobs. There can be people who can go and approach private sector businesses, because trust me, just by the mere fact of the private sector being characterized as not the government or not the public sector, is this implication of therefore my business, my way, or the highway attitude that's prevalent everywhere. And if that means, see, the one thing I discovered that's worse than Christianity, if I have felt like I was being pressured to be a Christian, it's if you're being goaded without, like, to the point where you start to lose like certain emotes from your vocabulary, like he, because of the strain put on you when these check and dispatch bullshit happens when the two owners pass you, or told your manager to accost you in a particular way from time to time. So it's not, yeah, certainly not everyone in the company, but what they do, and then you work out later on, yeah. So they thought not only was I in the house during the Paris attack, I told them I was an atheist. I'd become an atheist, which is to say I deconverted from the Christian religion and was no longer Christian. And that around that time it was admitted to me that it was, in the opinion of the more or less the company, that that Christianity is pretty much like paranoia. So having been taught at my work that Christianity was regarded to be like mental illness, then getting the job offer at O'Connor in 2009, and the manager taking me out the back of the shop there and starting to say to me, "Oh, you're a child of God." I had so much stress on my mind because I was worried about, uh, yeah, worry and stress. So these people who think that Jesus was a martyr who laid down his own life somehow during what was a political execution of someone have confused a lot of their senses. So Jesus, I would see him going up that hill, Golgotha, being worried tremendously, suicidal, all these horrid emotions. And so if you are ever made to feel any of those emotions around a person who thinks of that same narrative as a man being self-sacrificial and laying down his own life as part of his giving a present to you, a gift, then their reactions are going to be like, "Oh, is this for me? Oh, that's so nice of you, Luke. Is this for me? Are you for me right now?" So it can be that you're suicidal and a religious girl nearby you starts to flirt with you. Yeah. So isn't that fucking interesting? So yeah, I don't really date Christian girls. Yeah, the closer you are to being dead, the hotter you are, and sexier. And, but yeah, so remember, Ghostbusters